Okay guys, it's time for Vodcast 2.1. We're going to talk a little bit about the nature of matter, and really this is about what the heart of chemistry is about. So we're going to talk a little bit about what chemistry is and what we're going to deal with. So our central question then is, what is chemistry? And chemistry basically is the science where we're going to get into and investigate the structure and properties of matter. So to know that, we have to know what matter is. And you might want to press pause and get these notes real quick. But basically matter is anything that takes up space and has mass. So things that we've been talking about this year. Normal things you would think about: air, ink, your desk, your clothes, the walls all around us. Basically, almost everything that we think about most of the time is matter. If it takes up space and has mass, it's matter. Sometimes we don't think about air as having mass, but it does. So all of that sort of begs the question of, well then, if almost everything is matter, then what is not matter then? Okay? What things don't take up any space? What things don't have any mass? And really there's a couple of things that sort of pop out immediately when we start to think about this. One of the first is light. You can't weigh light, although technically it does cause some force. You'll learn in physics. And of course energy. Energy doesn't really take up any space, doesn't really have any mass. When we get into nuclear chemistry later in the year, we'll discuss a little bit. There is a relationship between mass and energy, but they're not the same thing. So what we want to talk a little bit about in this video are properties then of matter. In other words, what are things that matter has that we can measure or observe in some way. The first of these is one that we've been doing, that we did all throughout the first section. We did multiple, we did experiments in the room, and then we did some experiments with our separation activity on density. Temperature is another big one. We haven't done a whole lot with that yet, but we will as we go throughout the course of the year, and we're going to talk here in a minute a little bit more about what temperature is. Volume, we've certainly measured some volume. That's what graduated cylinders are for. That, again, of course, was part of our density measurements, as was mass. I mean, if matter has to have volume and take up mass, then those are two things that we can measure about it. We said we'd come back to temperature. Temperature also gives us another property of matter because it tells us about the speed of the molecules. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Remember, molecules and atoms are sort of the heart of chemistry. We can also tell like color of the matter, and there are all kinds of other things. We could talk about the length, we could talk about the luster or the hardness and those sorts of things as well. Basically, we can sort of subdivide all of these properties in a couple of ways. And one of the first ways that we can subdivide them is into a macroscopic and a microscopic level. Macroscopic, when you see the prefix macro, macro means big. Okay, so if we're talking about macroscopic, we're talking about the things that we can see. Microscopic means that it's the things that we can't really see. Okay, and so macroscopic would mean, like, if you looked at these two aspirin tablets, you know, what can you tell about them? They're white, they're round, they're a certain size, they have a certain mass, certain density. Over on the right, though, on the microscopic level, that's the formula for aspirin, and so that demonstrates how it's going to work inside of the body and stuff. So that's a microscopic level. So just remember, macroscopic we can see, microscopic are things that we can't usually see. So all of this relates a little bit to the phases of matter. We use three basic phases of matter, and you guys learned about some other stuff in previous classes, but the three basic phases are solid, liquid, and gas. And the speed that we talked about earlier, the temperature, has a lot to do with the phase. In gases, the molecules are really fast, so they're really far apart. In solids, the molecules don't have very much speed. They're moving very slowly, and so that allows them to be very tightly packed. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about this in a couple of podcasts when we talk about phases specifically and get a little bit further into it, but that's the general idea. And you see off to the right there sort of the overall definitions for each of those phases. So gases, can't tell the volume and shape. Liquids, you can tell the volume but not the shape. Solids have definite shape and volume. Two other ways that we can split this up just a little bit are what we call intensive and extensive properties. Intensive properties basically mean that basically they are sort of inherent or intrinsic to the substance itself. It doesn't matter how much of the substance you have. It always has the same property. So like gold always has a density of 19.3 grams per cubic centimeter. It doesn't matter how much you have. If you have a little tiny piece or if you got a big old gold bar, it still has the same density. It still has the same color. It's still going to have the same hardness and luster and all of those things. Extensive properties do depend on how much there are, and we're going to worry a lot about extensive. I mean, we worry some about intensive too, but we're going to worry a lot about extensive properties as well. So this is like mass, volume, the length. The more you have, okay, the more of the substance you have, the bigger the mass would be, the bigger the volume would be, all of those types of things. So thanks for listening, guys. This has been the first one. It's pretty short. The next couple will be slightly longer.